Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios, everyone. Ryan here, and this is definitely, for sure, not the second time I'm recording this video because someone committed the cardinal sin of photography and changed a bunch of camera settings without doing a test shoot after, and it was late and I was stupid. But that wasn't me. That didn't happen. So it's why we're recording a very off-the-cuff edition of Heavy Reflection. I actually had another topic planned, but I got a comment that was so seemingly simple, so benign that I couldn't believe I've not done a video on it yet. But it was one of those that was so simple, it kind of sent me into an existential breakdown. So I figured it'd probably be a good time to talk about it. And so today we're discussing what makes a guitar tone good or bad. A lot of the guitar content I make on this channel revolves around tips and tricks and best practices you can apply to your signal chain to get the most out of your guitar sound, especially for high gain stuff. But, there's no set amount of rules. There is no 10 commandments that you can follow to always achieve this great guitar sound, no matter what you're playing or where you're playing. So the simple answer to what makes a good guitar tone or a good guitar production is really context. The more complicated answer is that it depends on the music you're playing. It depends on your style. It depends on your instrument. It depends on the venue you're playing. It depends on who you're playing with. It depends if it even depends. So we'll go over a few of the things that I think is important to keep in mind and some general qualities you can always follow to get the best result. But hopefully, as you'll come to agree by the end of this video, there is no such thing as a universally great guitar sound. And it's a pretty easy thing to prove in concept. Take someone as legendary as Stevie Ray Vaughan. He played through too many amplifiers to count, from plexis to dumble amplifiers, but he had a very particular breakup, crunchy blues sound that is immediately associated with him. And you take, a more contemporary metal band like Gojira, who plays through high gain 5150 style amplifiers. That's another great guitar tone. You can't play Stevie's material through Gojira's rig in the same way that you cannot play Gojira's material through Stevie Ray Vaughan's rig and get a good guitar sound. Those things are great in their own rights, but they don't necessarily cover each other's spheres of music. Furthermore, a lot of the recorded guitar tones that many people try to go after, they hear on an album or over the radio, actually sound pretty nasty when taken out of the context of a band mix. Like Brian May, Jimmy Page even comes to example where, playing with the full band, it's perfect really, but you take it out of that mix and you hear the isolated instrument and it kind of sounds like a dying cat. So there is no such thing as even just a great guitar tone, not only for all kinds of music, but even in the context of one particular kind of music. So you might be wondering then, how on earth can I ever truly know if I have a good guitar sound? How do I know I'm going in the right direction, that it's going to translate properly to a recording or translate properly over the speakers in a live venue? There's a few things you can do to keep yourself on the right path, but at the end of the day, number one, you have to know what you're trying to achieve. It does no one any good if you just say, I want a good guitar tone. Well, in what way? Are you going for a really contemporary, grindy, mid-scooped kind of production? Do you want something bass heavy and lo-fi and fuzzy, or crystal clean? Or, there's too many options. You have to really know in your head what you're trying to achieve. Number two, you need to have the proper tools to achieve that and know how to use them. It does no one any good to have the most capable piece of gear out there or a room full of crap if you don't know how to use it. And number three, perhaps most importantly, you got to trust these. And honestly, you cannot teach that. It's all about time. It's all about consistently using them, and more than objectively identifying what's good versus bad. It's really about identifying what you like and what you want to take from, say, this band's production or this guy's playing, and meld it into your own thing. And that goes beyond guitar sound, obviously, but the same thing kind of applies there. Going back to that first point about knowing the end goal you're trying to achieve, it kind of runs parallel to that prior example of bands not being able to really swap their tones around. If you're in a technical death metal act, it wouldn't sound right with the guitar production of Electric Wizard. You can't be sludging and dooming up there when you're you know, playing 200 beats per minute, and you need articulation and a very particular type of high gain that isn't just, you know, throw all kinds of level boosts and fuzz and stuff at a classic amplifier. So you kind of have to know, get in that headspace of the sound you're shooting for to begin with. After that point, you can kind of identify that corner of the gear world of the production techniques needed to achieve that sound. And, you know, we tend to sweat a lot of nerdy details when it comes to guitar amps and pickups and pedals and speakers. But again, as long as you stay within kind of a certain radius of the type of gear, the type of tools needed, you're going to get a good sound as long as you use it properly. You know, changing one link in the chain is not going to make the entire thing fall apart. Going between a boosted dual rectifier and a 5150 and a hot rodded plexi or an Engel Fireball, it's going to be different, sure, but is it going to fundamentally transform the sound from amazing to horrible or vice versa? No, it's not that important. What is important is finding those appropriate sounds in the gear you're using, implementing the proper recording techniques. What's not useful is applying all this advice out there on the internet at face value as a blanket statement, because it's all context dependent, and I don't think a lot of us do a good job of explaining that. But you know, whether I set a EQ control or say like the tone control on a tube screamer here or here really depends on the guitar I'm using, its pickups, the pre-distortion filtering on the amplifier. You know, I'm going for trying to fix a problem, not necessarily just copying down a setting because that's what someone else is doing, who's using a completely different amp and guitar and going for a completely different sound. And it goes back to, again, knowing what you're trying to achieve and knowing what tools to use. Manufacturers are kind of the world's worst about this, honestly, because they'll, you know, have like settings in the manual that say, oh, just use this if you're going for a thrashy sound, or this is the way this guy sets it up, so it'll automatically make you sound like him. No, that's not how that works, because you're probably using different gear in a different environment and you play different and you're going for a different sound. So, use these once again. Don't worry about what the microphone position looks like or the number that's showing up on your amp modeler. And even if you follow all that advice to a T, it can still break down depending on where you dial in your sounds or how you're listening to that guitar sound. You know, is it through studio monitors in a spare bedroom? Is it through a combo amp? Is it in a live venue with a huge PA system? And some people have this hard and fast rule that practice tones and recorded tones and live tones can't be the same thing. They have to be dialed in differently. And I don't agree with that, because you're blaming the wrong part of that equation, when really it's our ears that are imperfect, not the gear. And guitarists a lot of times fuck with settings that don't need to be messed with. So it's kind of equal parts blame. But the main thing that is imperfect about the human ear is the phenomenon known as the Fletcher-Munson curve, where we don't hear mid frequencies or really any of the frequency spectrum linearly. So we tend to accentuate, especially vocal frequencies, because that's what we've evolved to listen to, at lower volume levels. And then as volumes get louder, it becomes less pronounced, and you know, the bass and treble start to fill in a little better. But that's why there's a loudness button on your car stereo. That's why when we play guitar in the bedroom especially, we'll turn up the bass and treble to kind of fill it out. But then when you turn your amplifier up to full volume, it's just way too boomy and screechy and scratchy, and it's not pleasant. So then you got to turn it back down. Compounding that problem is that the way we listen to guitar tones recorded and the way a lot of us practice are completely different. You know, when we listen to a recorded guitar sound, it's a speaker cabinet mic'd up, usually very close distance, that's then probably going through a microphone preamp and then getting compressed and EQ'd and all this stuff. But you're hearing a very particular slice of that guitar speaker. Whereas when you play out loud in the room, or when you have stage sound coming out from a cabinet, you're hearing the, what people call the in the room sound. And it's very directional. It depends on where you stand in front of a cabinet, or how far away, or if you're tilting your head compared to it. You know, you get very different sounds from that. And so to kind of combat the very directional nature of the speakers, to kind of make up for, you know, where they're getting projected, we tend to dial in things very differently. But guess what? If I'm standing this far back from a speaker cab, I'm hearing something very different than the microphone is. So most of the time, you got to emphasize the mids, cut the bass a little bit, especially cut the presence. And it might not sound so good out loud in the room, but it's an apples to orange comparison at that point. So that's kind of where the traditional attitude that a low volume practice sound versus a medium volume studio sound versus a high volume live sound all had to be pretty different. But in this very dominant age of amp modeling, I would argue they can all sort of be one and the same. And you really shouldn't have to be tweaking a lot of guitar amp parameters or messing with your signal chain to, accommodate whatever you're playing through, whether it be headphones or studio monitors. Again, it's not the fault of the gear; it's the fault of your ears, the volume you're playing back. And so a lot of those times you're going to have to be compensating somewhere else anyway, especially like live. As you turn it up louder, there's probably going to be some frequencies that are cutting in with the bass or the drums or whatever. That would happen with a real guitar rig anyway. So they should probably be doing that at the desk. Or worst comes to worst, you engage a wideband mid EQ and maybe a low high pass on your preset. But you shouldn't have to change amp models and cab sounds and all this stuff just because you're moving from the studio to live. It just doesn't make sense nowadays. In fact, I would say the best guitar sounds I've ever heard live have all been a tube amplifier going through a load box and impulse response with very low stage volume or none at all, or a completely digital solution, just a pod or a Kemper or an Axe Effects going straight to front of house. And because of that, it sounded pretty much identical to the studio version. It's just they're playing out loud. They've got acoustic drums and more dynamics, more volume. So I kind of think that's a flawed mentality that we continued to carry over. And I think it's added a lot of confusion into this soup of what makes something objectively good or objectively bad. So I guess to put a bow on this, I would steal a relatively famous comment by a character of the US justice system who said something to the effect that when it comes to trying to make legislation for pornography and explicit material, there's so many loopholes and technicalities and things you got to consider when trying to mark the difference between like performing art and straight up porn. And there's people that are going to argue that that falls within art anyway. But he said something like, when it comes to pornography, you know it when you see it. And it's kind of the same deal with guitar tone to me. You know a good one when you hear it. There's no right or wrong answer. But you do know that if you hear someone Travis picking a country lick through, a boosted dual rectifier on the red channel, probably not going to sound right. In the same way that playing Fear Factory through a Blues Junior with the reverb cranked probably isn't going to be all that nice sounding. But you flip those two rigs, then you probably got a really great tone for each. So there is no cut and dry answer. It's all about context. It's all about knowing what you're trying to achieve. And if you can hopefully trust your ears on that, it'll make things a lot easier. So any other questions and comments, please leave them down below. This video did spawn from one, so I'm always open for those. Thank you so very much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.